are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, the second in our test automation series. Today's webinar will be presented by Dorothy Graham. Dorothy is going to present on blunders in test automation. This is, as mentioned, the second webinar in three that we have lined up for you this week, with the final webinar tomorrow taking place with Jared Richardson. If you have any questions later on, you can enter them into the control panel. Feel free to enter the questions during the webinar and I can pose them to Dot at the end of the presentation. I'll now pass you over to Dot. Enjoy today's presentation. Dot, you should have control of the screen now.
Okay, thanks very much, Paul.
You should at least get a prompt. If there's any problems, just give me a shout.
Okay, is that looking good?
Looks good. I'll leave it to you, Dot.
Thanks so much, Paul.
Cheers, bye-bye.
Thank you very much for inviting me to present this webinar. I'm really pleased that EuroSTAR does such a lot for the testing community, providing lots of free stuff for people. And I hope you will enjoy this webinar today, which is Test Automation Blunders. Now, when I say test automation, what I'm referring to is what most people commonly mean by test automation, which is the automation of test execution and also focusing more on system-level test automation rather than unit-level automation as would be done within an agile team. So it's more the higher level of automation. Now, blunders, why blunders? I'm grateful to Lee Copeland for actually suggesting the term, the title of this presentation, and I've just discovered that my moving slides forward is not working. Hang on, I'll just go out of presenter mode and try and go back in again. Oh dear. I seem to have a problem here, Paul, in that my slides have frozen and I don't seem to be able to do anything. Oh, there it goes. Hopefully I will be able to do something now. Okay, so what do we mean by a blunder? Well, if you look in the dictionary, it actually comes from an Old Norse word, blundra, which is related to our word for blind. It means shutting your eyes. Current definitions, a mistake called by ignorance or carelessness or not thinking things through, or foolish or tactless remark, moving clumsily, or to mismanage, which is probably a more relevant one. And people blunder when they don't see or don't understand. And I hope that this presentation today will help you to avoid some of these test automation blunders. And these are the ones that I'm going to be talking about today. I have a total of 9 of them. And the first one is actually probably the most important and the most fundamental one, and that is thinking that testing tools actually do testing, because they don't. Really, they shouldn't be called testing tools. They've taken that name, but in fact it might have been better if they're called something else. You're probably familiar with the distinction that Michael Bolton makes of checking versus testing, and that's a useful distinction. I'm not entirely convinced I should change all my terminology for various reasons. There's a very interesting article written by Ken Kainer about that. But the point that Michael makes is that something which is automatable is what he would call a check. So a check is something that can be done by a machine. And a test is something that requires intelligence or sapience. So it is a useful distinction, because things that you can do automatically is not the same as things that you would do manually. Maybe we should have called them tester assistance tools or even check running tools. Because when you think about it, how are people and tools different? Well, what is it that people do? People are really good at a lot of different things. People are good at thinking, evaluating, assessing things, deciding, interpreting things, observing things. We are intelligent beings, and we bring our intelligence to bear on everything that we do. We're very good as human beings at recognizing patterns, recognizing faces, for example. I have one of these electronic passports, and when I go through the electronic gates now, the computer will actually recognize my face. Of course, one of the things it does is tell me to take my glasses off if I have them on, and then I can't see the message telling me I'm finished now, but that's another problem. But anyway, even babies can recognize faces, and yet it takes a lot of computing power now to recognize faces. People also have new ideas, they are creative, and people are very good at finding bugs. But of course, people also make mistakes, and sometimes that can be quite useful. So what are the tools like? What do they do? Well, actually, these testing tools do not do testing. What the tools do is they just run stuff, and they run whatever they've been programmed to run, including bad tests. If you give a testing tool terrible tests to run, it will quite happily do them. Not happily, because they don't have emotions. But the intelligence level of a tool is zero. Absolute zero. So in order to get the best out of both people and tools, we should get the tools to do what computers do best and get testers to do what people do best. So that's testing tools test. Testing tools don't test, actually. They just run stuff. So who needs GPS? Have you got GPS in your car? What's the first thing that you do when you're using the GPS? The very first thing. You get in, you turn it on. After you've turned it on, what's the first thing that you do? You put in your destination, right? Where are you going? What if you don't put a destination in? Well, the GPS can actually be useful, but in terms of getting you to where you want to go, if you don't tell it where you want to go, it's not going to get you there, right? Famous quote by Lewis Carroll, if you don't know where you're going, any road will do. So where are you going with your automation? An awful lot of people don't have clear goals or objectives for the automation or have the wrong goals. Testing and automation are different activities, and different activities need different objectives. So there are good objectives for testing, such as find lots of bugs, gain confidence, do some investigating, but are those good objectives for automation? Well, the objectives for automation should be objectives for testing, because testing and automating testing are two different activities. Given regression testing and exploratory testing, which type of testing finds the most bugs? This is just, well, of course, it finds bugs. If you find bugs, then there are lots of bugs. Regression testing, there is a test that was already working to stop working when you run it again. Pretty unlikely, right? So the regression tests, by their nature, don't find many bugs. And yet, what is it that's most often automated? It is regression testing. Now, this makes them more consistent, more reliable, and in fact makes them probably even less likely to find bugs. So thinking that the success of automation is to find lots of bugs is a serious mistake. It's the wrong goal for automation. It's not automation that finds bugs. It's tests that find bugs. So if you think that automation is going to find you lots of bugs, it's not going to work. Automation is a mechanism for the execution of the tests, for the running of the tests. And if you take a single test, that test, the bug-finding ability of that particular test, is not affected by whether it's run manually or whether it's automated. If there's a bug there and that test is run, it will find the bug, whether that test is run manually or whether it's automated. Now, there are probably exceptions, but roughly. So finding bugs can be a very dangerous objective, especially for regression automation. At one of the conferences, I sat next to a guy, introduced myself, and he turned out to be a very high-level manager who had come to his very first testing conference just to find out a bit about which was very laudable. And I asked him about automation, and he said, well, yes, the guys are doing some automation, and they tell me they've got lots of tests automated, and they're running them every night and every weekend and things like that. But I'm thinking of knocking it on the head. Why? Sounds like they're giving you some benefits of value. Well, they're not finding many bugs. Now, this was regression automation, and it wasn't finding many bugs. Regression tests don't find many bugs. One of the case studies in our book about experiences of test automation, this is chapter 27, Ed Allen and Brian Newman. They actually did a study of a couple of thousand of bugs over several years to find out which types of testing found the most bugs for them. And so distributing 100% between the four boxes, it's not 25% each, but I'll give you a hint that the fixed verification found only 8.4%, and the manual scripted testing found 24%. So you've got sort of, what, 70% left? Would it be about 35% each for automated test and exploratory testing? Certainly not. The exploratory testing found nearly 60%, 58%. And if you're really good at maths, you can now figure out that the automated tests actually only found 9.3%. That's less than 10%. So if your goal is to find lots of bugs, looking at something like this, you would tend to think, well, automated testing isn't doing very well, is it? Let's get rid of it. This is the reasoning that this manager who I met had gone through. But the thing is, even if you got rid of the automated tests, that would harm the other bug-finding abilities, because the testers, rather than having time to do exploratory testing, they'd now be spending their time doing manual regression testing. So you wouldn't find as many bugs if you didn't have the... But it's not the automation itself that's finding the bugs. It's the fact that the tests are automated and those tests are running, and that's giving you value, not finding bugs. It's the difference between efficiency and effectiveness. If you have really slow testing, then you think, oh, well, let's automate. That'll be much better, won't it? Then we'll have fast testing. Well, it sounds great, but it's not really the most important thing. What's more important is how effective is your testing. If you have poor quality slow testing and you automate poor quality tests, you're just going to have poor quality faster testing. If your testing is in chaos, automating chaos just gives you faster chaos. What you really want to do is have good testing, and in fact that's more important. So if you're starting off here in the bottom left, that's the worst place to be, and a lot of people go over to automating whatever they have and thinking that's going to give them benefits. You're much better off by going up, first of all, to this quadrant and saying, let's have better quality testing. You will get more value by doing that than by automating just anything that you happen to have. And then you can look at what you do have and the better quality tests that you have, automate of those the ones that are worth doing, and that's where you're going to get the greatest benefit. Okay, the next blunder, silver bullet syndrome. I'm sure you're familiar with this. I wish I had a pound for every time somebody said to me, what's the best tool, or what's the right tool? It's a bit like saying, what's the best car? Now, supposing you've recently won something, and what you've won is you can have any car you want, anything at all. Money is no object. What sort of car would you like to have? Are you picturing something like this, perhaps? I dare say some of you are. Now, my son-in-law is a classic car buff, so for him, maybe that would be the best car. But if you've got 4 children and 2 dogs, neither of those is going to be a very good option as a family car. You're looking for something like this, right? So what's the best car? Well, of course, it depends on what your objectives are, and that's also true for automation. We have a cost, and that's a certain amount of budget, and we'll have benefits that we hope to achieve with our automation. But which quadrant would you like to be in? Now, there's a sort of a perception out there, which is actually not true, but there's a perception that if you spend a lot of money, then you're bound to get good results. And if you buy a commercial tool, you will be in this quadrant. Yes, it's going to cost you a lot, but you're going to have great benefits. And there's also a perception, I think particularly among larger companies, that if you go for open source tools, you're down in that quadrant. No, you haven't paid a lot, but there again, you get what you pay for. Now, this is not, although there are examples of this is not true universally by any means. I've seen a lot of organizations where they've had commercial tools and they've paid a lot, but they haven't had good benefits. And I've seen even more organizations where people have got open source tools and have been very successful with it. And the key, whatever type of tool you have and whatever tool you have, is that you do need to invest in the automation in order to be successful. So in addition to your budget for the tool itself, you need to invest in how you do the automation. And if you do that, you will get, it's perhaps moderate cost rather than low cost, you will get greater benefit both from open source tools and from commercial tools. So another aspect of the silver bullet syndrome is assuming that success will just come. Success is automatic. Well, it's not. Automation is much more than just a tool. It takes time and effort to succeed. Building good automation is a learning process. You won't do it right the first time. I mean, if you think back to anything that you've done for the first time, your first effort is not your best, right? Whether it's learning to ski or any new hobby you take up, the more you do it, the more practice you get, the better you get at it. But that means your first efforts are not good. And it's important to realize that and to know that automation is a learning process and that you do need to continue to grow it and to build it better as time goes on. And in order to do that, you also need to have good management support. And that's one of the things that came out when we were doing the book on experiences in automation, how critical management support is and how people who were successful had good management support. High-level managers need to understand both the capability of automation and its limitations and have realistic expectations and set a realistic budget. It's no good trying to expect it to happen on a shoestring or in people's spare time because it doesn't. And of course, people issues are also important. It's people who are using the automation and people who develop the automation. It's no good having a few people saying, oh, we're going to build automation and it's going to be great and everyone will just come in and start using it. It doesn't happen that way. It's got to be integrated into the organization if you want it to give benefits that are going to be long-lasting and widely used. The next blunder, automating the wrong thing. A lot of people say, well, we've got some manual tests, so we'll automate them. And that is a good starting point. So if we have our manual tests here, and we have our automated tests here, and we have the manual tests that we've automated so far, it looks like we've automated maybe half of them. So should we be trying to move the circles together so that all of our manual tests are automated? We have some here that we haven't automated yet. And the answer to that question, should we automate all of our manual tests, is no, you shouldn't. There are tests in here, probably including some you've already automated, that shouldn't be automated. Some examples. You know, CAPTCHA, when you have to, the wavy letters and you have to type them in, the reason for doing that is to prove that you're not a computer. So think about it for a minute. If your automated tool can type those wavy letters in, even though it's a computer, that means your CAPTCHA doesn't work. It's broken. I mean, I know there are ways around it to test it, but it's just an example of something which shouldn't be able to be automated. What about, do these colors look nice? Or is this the way real users would actually use the system? The only way to find that out is actually to observe real users. Another example of a test that shouldn't be automated, Simon Mills in his chapter, he's written a chapter in both of our automation books actually, telling the story of a guy who was really keen on automation. And he had a particular test he wanted to automate. And he spent a day and it wasn't quite done, and another day, and another day, a week, and no, it still wasn't really working well. Another day, another week, 10 days, and it wasn't really quite watertight yet. But this was a test that he's now invested 2 weeks of time in trying to build, which only took half an hour to run manually and was only needed once a quarter. That is not a good investment in automation. there will be tests that are much better just run manually. Why is it that we tend to think we must automate everything? We should not. We should only automate the things which are going to give us benefit. Ellen Page says we should automate 100% of the things that should be automated. Not 100% of everything. That's not the right thing to do. So some manual tests should not be automated. But the other side of this coin is if you think only of automated your existing manual tests, you're really missing a trick with the automation, because there are things that can be done with automation that are difficult or impossible to do manually. If you're testing manually, you can see what's on the screen and say, oh, that looks about right, but you don't know whether your GUI objects are all in the right state. Whereas with a tool, this might be something you are able to check. So there will be things that you can do with the automation that you couldn't do or you wouldn't do with manual testing. Things like new approaches to testing, high-volume automation, generating lots of tests around existing tests, monkey testing, where you're looking for whether the system is falling down or not. There are lots of things that the tools can do, and it's important to think outside the box about this. I think Kim mentioned something like that in his webinar on Monday about automation plus the execution. Absolutely right. And what about different roles for automation? Well, we have, we use the analogy here of a van. We have the test tool is actually the engine. It's what's sort of getting us from one place to the next. The test cases are the passengers here in the car, and the car is the Testware architecture. The driver is the tester. Where's the test automator? Well, actually, the test automator is sort of like the mechanic. He's looking after the health of the engine and also the health of the car. The one person who's designing the car itself might be the Testware architect. And we might actually have more than one test automation regime going on, and we might even have a fleet manager, which would be a test automation manager, managing the automation for a lot of different projects or a lot of different teams within the organization. So carrying the analogy a little bit further, the difference between, with automobiles, there are some things which are really good to use them for, right? So long journeys, especially if there's no public transport. In the UK, trying to go cross-country, because public transport is great if you want to go down to London, but not if you want to get across the country. But that's saying, let's use a car for everything. Let's do, is like saying, let's automate everything. But there are some things which aren't so good for an automobile. What about going out into the garden? Well, you wouldn't drive your car into your garden. You'd want to walk up the back door into the garden. What about driving to America from the UK? It can't be done, folks. There's an ocean in the way. Driving into London. Now, that's something which is particularly for me. The last time I did it was at least 30 years ago, and I vowed then never to try it again. Now, it's possible, but it's not for me. So again, just as in automation, there are things that might be possible for some people, but wouldn't be right for other people. And what about just driving half a mile? Well, actually, sometimes that might be a good idea. For example, if you're going to the vets with an uncooperative cat that you would have difficulty carrying. And the same is true with automation. There are some things which automation is absolutely great for. Tests are very complex and hard to do manually. Regression tests and tests that are needed to be run often. This is where automation really gives you a lot of benefit. Other types of testing, for example, performance testing, which is impossible to do manually if you're going to really look into testing the performance well. But there are other things which are not so good to automate, like user opinion tests, trying to test untestable apps or software. It may not be worth pursuing, or tests that are will take too much effort to automate, or tests that are not needed often. But here again, there may be exceptions, because sometimes it can be very useful. For example, if you have a test which is very complex, where you'd have a lot of finger trouble if you were doing it manually, it might be worth just automating the input for that test, because it's going to save you an awful lot of, oh, rats, I did it wrong again, I'd better start again. So I hope you find that interesting. Now, the thing with the automating the right thing is the Testware architecture is really critical. And this is the most important technical issue with test automation. If you have a poor testware architecture, you will probably end up having very high maintenance costs. And this is the most frequent cause of automation being abandoned and put back on the shelf. So there are two layers of abstraction which are critical. If we have our testers up here and our test execution tool down here, everything in between, you could say, well, this is the testware architecture. And if you do nothing at all, then you are, in effect, accepting whatever the tool has given you. But it's important, actually, that you don't do that, because you will not get good benefits from automation. At this level, the tool-facing level, we need to have our testware organized into a way which suits us, which suits the organization. This is the way we want our tests to be stored. This is how we want them to be organized. And it's also important to have good programming structure with the scripts so that we have reuse, so that we have the tests are designed well according to good programming practices. A lot of people, when they're just, if they've been testing and don't have a development background, when they start using the tools, they don't write good code because they haven't been trained in that area. So we need to have technical help from people who do know how to do programming well so that the testware is also well structured, just as the software is. And the tool-specific tests should be kept to an absolute minimum. You want your tests to be able to survive more than one release of your software, so they need to be maintainable, reusable, but also more than one release of your tool, perhaps more than one version of your tool. You may want the test to run on more than one environment, more than one platform. So the same test should be able to run largely unchanged in various different places using various different tools if you keep the tool-specific and the platform-specific stuff to an absolute minimum. So this technical layer of abstraction is what gives the automation a long life. It will survive a long time. It will be useful for years on end. It won't be just a one-month wonder. Now, the other level of abstraction is to do with who is using the automation. If the automation is devised using high-level keywords so that the testers can write the tests in a domain-specific test language, they can write tests in a way which makes sense to them. The testers should be the ones who are in charge of what the automated tests should be. These are the tests that we want to be automated. They may not be in charge of implementing the automation, but they should be the driving force. And if we use high-level keywords so that the testers can write in the language of whatever the application is, if it's insurance, it might be things to do with policies, new customers, claims, and so on. If it's phones, it might be contacts or making calls or that sort of thing, or network issues. So if we do that, then we will have more people able to use the automation. Anyone should be able to write an automated test, a test which then can be executed using a tool. But in order to get to that point, it takes a lot of structured support from people with technical knowledge. So if you only just accept what the tool gives you, you are tied to that tool and, in fact, to that version of the tool. So if you want automation to be long-lasting and widely used, the testware architecture is critical. And there's a very good book I could recommend. Chapter 5 is all about testware architecture. If you'd like to have a copy of that chapter, I'll be happy to email it to you. My email address will be at the end. The next one. Now this one was inspired by an old ad for Yellow Pages. Some of you out there may not even remember the time when you wanted to find a business, you looked in a book, which was full of yellow pages. But this was a guy who met a girl and decided she was interested in yoga, so he decided to book a yoga class. He looks in the yellow pages, he rings them up and says, I'd like to book a yoga class. Beginner, I see myself more as an intermediate, he says. And he turns to his flatmate saying, a bunch of ladies going, how hard can it be? Then the next scene is you see him in this yoga class where everyone's standing on one leg and he topples over. And then the flatmate is helping him spell out chiropractor. If you Google how hard can it be Yellow Pages ad, you'll find the ad, which is one of my favorites. But anyway, there's certainly an analogy here to automation because a lot of people think, automation, how hard can it be? A bunch of people pressing a button. But it's not like that. and different activities do require different skills. The classic blunder is just giving the tool to the testers and expecting them to get on with it. Just let the testers do the automation. This is one of the problems with calling them testing tools. You think, testing tools, testers do it. But in fact, they're not. If you do that, you may well have people trying to write the automation without automation skills, which are, in fact, programming skills. Nowadays, there's a newer blunder where, as people are, more and more testers are becoming developers as well, but then we're also having developers who are doing the automation, which can be a good thing. It is generally useful. But then, well, we don't need testers then. Let's just let the automators not only write the automation, but write the tests as well. And I think there's a danger then of people writing the tests who don't have testing skills. And that can't be good either. So is it the tester's job to automate? Is it the driver's job to maintain the car and the engine? Some of you out there might quite like maintaining cars and are quite happy changing the oil and spark plugs or whatever else you do with an engine. I certainly would not be. I don't want to go anywhere near it. I take it to my friend the garage and get them to do everything for me. Well, not quite the screen wash, but I actually get my husband to do that. So, I mean, some people might want to do automation, but other testers may not. And test execution automation is software development, and it does require programming skills. Not all testers want to do that. And in fact, even if they were forced to do it, they may not be very good at it. Hans Buwalda says you might lose a good tester and gain a poor programmer. Should automators have testing skills? Well, certainly very useful and helpful. I don't think it's as essential as having automators have development skills, though. But of course, the trend nowadays is to have people who can do both. And I have nothing against that. What I do object to is forcing testers who don't want to be automators into becoming automators, or making them feel that they're not really very worthwhile if they don't want to do automation. I think that's totally wrong. I think that's devaluing the tester skills. But that's perhaps another story. I'll get off my high horse now. But a lot of people do end up being both a tester and an automator. And that's okay, but sometimes that can lead to a conflict of interest. So supposing you are both tester and automator. You come into work in the morning and you think to yourself, I'm a tester. I'm going to do some testing today. So you run 25 tests. And at the end of the day, you say to yourself, I did a good job today. I ran 25 tests. I found some really good bugs. I've written those up, and we've got a lot of tests we have to get through before the release. And I did a good job today. Ran all those tests. But I didn't do any automating. So the next day you go in and you say, I'm going to be an automator today. So you automate 4 tests. And at the end of the day, you say to yourself, I did a good job today. I automated 4 tests. I reused a lot of stuff, and I've made sure that these tests that I've done are well structured, and there's some new reusable stuff that other tests can use. And I've paid attention to robustness of the tests so that little things aren't going to make it derail the test, and reporting and cleaning up after itself. But I only did 4 tests today. Okay, now your boss comes in and says, what did you do today? I automated 4 tests. But you've got a great pile of tests that have to go out the door. Automation is better long term. Is your manager going to say, okay, carry on doing 4 tests a day and we'll just move the release date? It doesn't seem to work that way, does it? Deadline pressure tends to push the dual role, tester-automator, back into manual testing just to get these tests out the door because it's such an urgent, immediate problem. And then, of course, people look back on it later and say, oh, that automation didn't do much, did it? This is why. It's better, really, to have someone who's dedicated to the automation. By the way, one of the patterns in the Test Automation Patterns Wiki is dedicated resources. Well, will the tools replace the testers? That's another great idea for managers. Oh, we've got the tool now, so we can reduce the number of testers. And I have heard examples of people who let the testers go when they bought a tool. How crazy is that? Well, if someone has that attitude, we can get rid of the testers now we have the tool. I would like to ask them, what are your testers like? How do they work? Do they come in and see a written script which is completely detailed and spelling out absolutely every little thing that they have to do, and they follow it slavishly, looking neither to the left nor to the right, never thinking, oh, this doesn't look right, but well, this is what the script says, so I better just follow it, and just going on hour after hour doing exactly what it says on a piece of paper? Well, if that's what your testers are doing, then I think they're more like mindless morons, and perhaps they could be replaced by a tool. But if your testers are different to that, if your testers are intelligent investigators, where, yes, they might have a script or a list of ideas of things to test, but as they're going down through the piece of paper and checking off things that they have done, they're thinking to themselves, I wonder, or what if, or this doesn't look quite right to me, I'm going to do, or I wonder if they thought about this, and I'm going to go and explore over there. And in fact, their brains are engaged, and as they're testing, although they have something which is guiding part of what they're doing, they're not totally constrained by that. They're also doing more creative testing as they're going along, perhaps coming back to do the things that they're were wanting to get through as well, because someone wrote out something which was a list of things that should be tested. But they're not just doing what's on the paper. They're doing far more than what's on the paper. Or they might be testing without any pieces of paper at all. They are intelligent investigators. This is not what the tools do. So the tools do not do testing. In fact, when you've got automation, you need more skills, not fewer skills. And the automation can free the testers to do more testing, proper testing, more exploratory testing, designing more and better tests, and having time, because it's taking away the drudgery, to do more testing and therefore find more bugs. So when you have automation, you might find more bugs, but it's not the automated tests that are finding the bugs, it's the testers who are able to do more testing. Tools do not replace testers. They support them. They enable them to do better testing. The stable application myth. Well, of course, we can't start automating until the application or the GUI is stable, right? Hang on a minute. I remember this attitude towards testing from 30 or 40 years ago. Oh, we can't start testing until the code's working. We know now that we should be thinking about testing right at the very beginning. The whole idea behind test-driven design is if you think about the testing before you even write a line of code, you're going to write much better software. It's a throwback. So thinking that testing comes at the end, thinking that automation comes at the end of the testing. And also, testing is only execution? Certainly not. The design of the tests and also the design of the automation should come early, should come first. Just as testing is more than testing, in other words, more than test execution, automation is also more than automation. It's more than execution. If you can design your automation early on and get it ready to run whenever there is something ready to test, then you have a lot more benefit from the automation. And if you use good programming principles for the design of your automation, and if you have your automated testware reviewed or inspected so that once it starts testing the software, the only problems it's finding is in what it's testing instead of in itself, because there will be bugs in the automation as well, then you're much further along. But that means starting thinking about the automation right at the beginning. So when should we write automated tests? You might be familiar with the test automation pyramid, which was invented by Mike Cohn. Lisa Crispin refers to it in Chapter 1 of the Experiences book. And it looks like this. It makes the point that we are doing more unit and component tests than we're doing API-level tests and GUI tests, which is fine. We have fewer tests at the GUI level, but that doesn't mean none. and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing tests at that level, and it also doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing automation at all of the levels. At the lower level, the test-driven design, that will be done by the developers. The middle level, and particularly the higher level, might be done by system testers. Now, supposing things are unstable, supposing your GUI is unstable, the developers haven't decided what the layout of the screen is going to be like, what the button names are going to be, where things are going to be, all that kind of thing. Don't look on that as a problem. Look on that as an opportunity. If things are going to be changing around, maybe once the system is live, the things that people want to change now will continue to be changed. So build your automation to be flexible and robust against that type of change. If you can anticipate what the most common kinds of changes are going to be in maintenance, make your automation so that whenever that type of thing changes, the automation will just work, or you need minimal change to it. For example, if they keep changing the names of things, then build yourself a table where you adopt standard name used within all of the automated tests, and then just plug in the current name of whatever that thing happens to be whenever it changes. And then all your automated tests will still work. So think about which aspects are stable. Yes, maybe the GUI is late, but don't think, oh, we can't do any automation, but automate the things that you can automate. When something is stable, then you can execute those tests. But if you build the GUI test with the detail abstracted out, using an object map, for example, you can get those tests ready to run, and then they will run much more quickly. If you wait until things are stable before you start the automation, you will be behind. You will never catch up. It will not give you value for money. So use the fact that you can abstract the detail out and build your automation early. Is test automation a project, or is it not a project? Well, actually, both of these are blunders. If you don't think of automation as a project, you might be thinking, oh, it doesn't need funding and resourcing. Just do it in your spare time. Now, how many of you actually have any spare time? I've never come across anyone who had spare time at work. Some organizations sort of make space for exploring new things. I know Google had this half day, which I think is wonderful. It's in effect giving somebody half a day of spare time a week. But you know, the sorts of organizations that say do automation in your spare time are generally not the ones that give you any spare time. And you do need to have automation properly funded and resourced, otherwise it's not going to happen. But of course, another blunder is thinking that automation is just a project. Oh, when will the automation be finished? Well, actually, it's never finished if the tests that you're automating are on a system which is going to continue to live. The automation should live as long as the system that the tests are run for. It'd be easy to maintain the tests when changes are made to the system. And so we need to have ongoing continuous improvement. The automation, once it's started, isn't going to be the best solution. It needs to be improved. We need to find ways of making it better. And this means refactoring the automation at regular intervals. This was one of the key things that Lisa Crispin, the key to their success in the chapter in the Experiences book. Every 6 months, they had a sprint that was dedicated to refactoring their automation. And this was a key thing in keeping the automation working really well, and if they were building up technical debt for some particular thing, they would address that. And this meant that the automation was successful and went on for years. Well, what a lot of organizations end up doing is having some kind of a project to get the automation started, but then you need continued support. So yes, it is a project, but it's not just a project. And if it's a project to get things started, do things on a small scale. Have a pilot project where you experiment with different ways of doing the automation before you begin to roll it out to other areas of the company. Testing inside the box. This is another blunder that people do. It's the difference between automated tests and automated testing. We have at our church, we have a new dishwasher which came with the new kitchen. And a dishwasher, as you know, is an automated solution to washing the dishes. And so this should be an automatic process, right? Well, you actually have to turn it on 20 minutes before you want to use it, or otherwise it won't be hot enough. And when you get to the end, well, that's okay, that's all right. You put the dishes in and it washes them in about a minute. So that's actually quite good. But then after you've finished, rather than just being able to turn the machine off, you have to drain it. And in order to drain it, there's a button you press. But you don't just press the button, you have to hold the button in until all the water is drained away. This is not automatic. This is a manual process. And a lot of people, unfortunately, do their automation in a similar way. So we have some manual process and an automated process. Well, we set up our test environment, load the test data, set up the prerequisites. Oh, now we have in the middle, we have some automation here where we're executing and comparing results. So that's where we're using the tool. And then logging and analyzing failures, reporting defects, clearing up after the test case, repeating for other tests, and then clearing up the environment afterwards and summarizing results. Yes, we have some automated tests in there, but the tests are embedded in a manual process, in manual processes. This is not what we want. We may get some benefit from it, but not nearly as much as we can have by thinking outside the box, by thinking, what else can we automate? I was reading in TechWell newsletter the other day that Paul Parsons has a new book out, and he makes the point in there that we should take the test out of test automation and just talk about automation. Just talk about what else can we automate. A very good point. What we want to have is to automate as much as possible within the things that we can do. So yes, we still need to select and identify which tests we want to run automatically, but then the environment should be automatically set up. The data should be loaded for each test, and again, we should be able to run more than one test after each other, setting up, executing, comparing results, logging results, clearing up afterwards, and clearing up after a set of tests as well. In our first automation book, we call this the pre- and post-processing. And unless you automate that as well, you're not getting very good benefit from automation. So we want automated testing, not just a few automated tests. And the final blunder is isolationism, I've called it, and isolation from a number of different things. One of them is isolation from change, encasing your first efforts in stone, thinking that the way you do things first of all is going to be the best way of doing things, but it's not. Automated tests need to be reviewed, they need to be refactored, they are not static. If they're static, if they're not changing, they are in fact dying. If you want them to last a long time, you need to keep investing in them. A lot of automation efforts seem to be isolated from realism. Optimism is not a good test strategy for automation, or for anything else for that matter. The automated tests do need to be tested. They will have bugs in them. The automated tools will have bugs in them. And we need to have realistic expectations for what we can expect from test automation. Without some form of realistic expectations, they're doomed to fail. If you sell somebody something to your managers, or a tool vendor sells them something which is a vision which is just completely pie in the sky, you are guaranteed not to achieve it. So you are guaranteed to fail. Whereas if you say, well, I think we can do this in the next 3 months, we can perhaps do this in the next 6 months, and all of these steps along the way are realistically achievable with proper investment, then you will succeed. So that's very important. One of the other things is isolation from managers in terms of not making the benefits visible enough to the people who matter in a way that communicates well with them. The costs of automation tend to become visible by themselves because people can see you're spending time on things. But what about the benefits of automation? And it's not necessarily return on investment, because that's not always the answer. Again, in the experiences book, we encouraged people to say what their return on investment was, and we had some dramatic successes, including one of 900% in the anecdotes chapter. But not everybody who succeeded actually quantified ROI. But what they did do, they communicated the benefits to the people who, at the high level, who could see what was happening. Now, another thing that we found in doing the experiences book is the organizations that did the best with automation also had the best relationship with their developers. So collaborating with developers is also very important. Don't be isolated from developers, working together with developers. This is certainly a major change in the sort of testing world that's happened over the last 10 or 20 years. 30 or 40 years ago, it was thought that the developers and the testers should be completely isolated from each other as a way of preserving independence. Whereas now, and that didn't really work very well, now with people collaborating, you still have independence because you have different people looking at things from different points of view. But collaborating with developers is the best way to go. One of the reasons for that is that developers can make it very difficult for the automators. If they're using non-standard controls, for example, or things like that. We want to have the software designed to make it easy to automate tests for it. But that might involve the developers doing something different to what they're doing at the moment. So the testers come along and say, I think you should design your software this way. And the developers say, why should we? What's in it for us? And that's a perfectly good question. And in order for you to get their cooperation, you need to find something that will be of benefit to them. For example, by being able to run some tests for them quickly, giving them quick feedback using a variety of environments that you have access to that they don't. So if you help them, they'll help you, hopefully. And isolation from the wider world, not seeking out other existing knowledge. There are some very good books on test automation. I'm totally biased about at least two of them, for example. We have the wiki, which Sareta Gamba, who's a contributor to the Experiences book, and I have been working on for a couple of years now. This is free advice about test automation. Go to testautomationpatterns.org or testautomationpatterns.wikispaces.com. There are a number of really good articles. There are good ebooks about test automation. EuroSTAR promotes a lot of ebooks that give you a lot of good, useful advice about automation and so on. Don't just blunder on blindly, but do look at what else is available and what else you can learn from. Keep learning. That's important. Okay, so we've looked at a number of blunders today. Testing tools don't test. They just run stuff. They don't do testing. They're very good at what they do, but what they don't do is think. I've never yet met a testing tool that said to itself, I wonder, or what if? Who needs GPS? Well, automation needs an objective. Automation needs direction. There is no silver bullet. It needs time and effort to be successful. Don't automate the wrong thing. Pay attention to the Testware architecture. And not all manual tests should be automated. And don't automate just manual tests. Think about automating other things as well. How hard can it be? Well, yes, it is hard, and it needs different skills, and this needs to be supported. Don't think you have to wait for a location to start automating. See this as an opportunity for building flexibility into your automation. Automation is a project at times, especially when you're starting, but it's not just a project. It takes ongoing effort you need to refactor. And think outside the box, not just inside the box. Automation is more than just execution and comparison. And don't be isolated. Collaborate with your managers, with developers, do experiments, and read. Be aware of what's around there. So I hope this has helped you to be aware of these blunders so that you can avoid making them yourself. And thank you very much for listening, for being here. By the way, there is a special offer on the ebook only of the Experiences book. If you order it direct from the publishers, if you put that code in, you should get a 35% discount. So I think it's over to you now, Paul, if there are any questions.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dot. Thanks for a great presentation. I hope everybody enjoyed it. If anybody does have any questions for Dot, please type them into the control panel now and I will ask them of Dot. as we go on. Just a couple of things to bring to your attention before we move to questions. We have the final webinar in the series tomorrow at the same time, 2 p.m. GMT. So continuous feedback, the new paradigm, and that's with Jared Richardson. So if you haven't already registered for that, there's still time to register. And of course, for anybody who's keen on speaking themselves at the EuroSTAR Software Testing Conference, the call for submissions is now open for next year's conference in Stockholm. The program committee and program chair Shmuel Gershon have chosen the theme Learning to Test, Testing to Learn, and the call for submissions can be accessed on the EuroStarSoftwareTesting.com website, and it will be open until the 5th of February. Perhaps you might have your own test automation experiences that you can share with the software testing community in Europe. Just one question that has popped up thus far. Are there times when automated tests do find bugs? You mentioned that automated tests don't find bugs, but are there instances where they do?
Yes, actually there are. And basically things like test-driven design, when the first time you're running the test is in its automated form, or behavior-driven design, model-based testing, when you're actually building a model and then you're automatically generating the tests, and then those tests will be run, or monkey testing, things like that, or even using keyword-driven, where the users are writing the tests perhaps in a spreadsheet using the high-level keywords. Basically, it's any time when the first time a test is run is in its automated form. When you're automating regression testing, of course, the first time that test is run would have been manual, and then you've automated that test. So then it's much less likely to find a bug. But the first time any test is run is when it's most likely to find a bug. The bug-finding potential of any test is at its greatest the first time it's run. So that there are examples when automated tests do find bugs, but it's not regression testing.
Okay, thanks, Dot. Just one comment or question from Marzio Cancellieri coming in here now. But if I'm a tester who's able to automate, is it not a bad idea to allow me to write down some code to do it, especially for those scenarios, stories I own?
That's a good question, and yes. I mean, any tester who wants to automate, I would not discourage them. And I think if you can do the automation as well as testing, that gives you sort of, you're more multi-skilled, and then you're certainly more in demand, especially these days. I don't want to discourage people from doing automation if they want to, and if this is something that they would like to learn. The thing that I object to is forcing people into doing it when they don't want to. So if you want to write automated tests, and if that's something that you are able to do and would like to develop yourself, then I would say by all means do. Again, if testers have an understanding of code, it can also be helpful in testing and looking at sort of the technical side of testing. So I'm not against people who are both testers and automators, but I do see problems with it, particularly with testers who perhaps have come from a business background and who don't have a development background, being either forced into becoming that sort of forced into trying to attain that technical expertise which they perhaps don't want to do and wouldn't be good at, and also feeling that they are no longer valued for the testing skills that they bring to their job. So I suppose I'm a champion of those kind of testers. But if you want to do both, by all means do. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Dot. Another question from Jack Marshall. Are there features or capabilities to look for when choosing an automation framework which are common to the better systems?
That's what features to look for in an automation framework. That's a very good question, and it's a bit like what's the best tool. So I wouldn't give a sort of, it's difficult to say what would be the best features for you because your situation might be different to somebody else's. One way, if you're looking to choose a new framework, and framework tools, by the way, are becoming more popular now, and the framework tools do give you some of that structure where you can, moving towards the levels of abstraction, particularly enabling the users to write the tests. There are some commercial tools that involve that kind of framework and also some open source ones. I think the best way to find out what sort of features you would need in your framework would be to perhaps experiment with a few of the open source ones and see, maybe take 2 or 3 of those and write your tests using each of those frameworks and see what works best for you. Experiment by taking 2 versions of the software and so writing the test for one version and then trying the test on another version and see how much effort is involved in converting the tests so that they will work on the new version to get an idea of how difficult maintenance is going to be. I hope that gives you some useful tips. Oh, by the way, in our first book, we have a chapter about choosing a tool, which again I could send to you if you'd like to have.
Okay, thanks, Dot. It's just 3 o'clock now. I don't see any other questions coming in at the moment. There's just one question on the presentation slides. Those will be made available on testhuddle.com after the webinar, and we should have the webinar recording up within the next hour or so too. So thanks, Dot, once again for another EuroSTAR webinar. Thanks for taking the time to do it, and thanks for everybody who attended today and took part, and hopefully you'll be available to attend tomorrow's webinar with Jared as well. So thanks very much, everyone, and goodbye.
Thanks, Paul. Bye.